On February 2nd, 2021, Derek Morris released his second book, Retrogamedev Volume 2. This is his follow-up to Volume 1, which has inspired many people to get back into coding for the Commodore 64. One such person was Marcelo Cabral, who has created Retaliate DX, an exciting upcoming RGCD release, in part thanks to this book. Volume 2 is a literal continuation of Volume 1 and assumes the reader has learned all the concepts presented in Volume 1 and is ready to level up to learn new concepts and ideas. Some of the fundamentals that are required before reading Volume 2 are number bases and uses, Commodore 64 basic hardware, fundamental 6502 assembly language, and how to run PRG files in an emulator or on real hardware. It also assumes the reader is willing to take up the challenge to independently learn new software tools that are required for this journey. Derek provides a free download of all the source code and assets presented in the book over on his forum at retrogamedev.com. In Volume 2, Derek makes the development environment switch from CBM Program Studio to Kick Assembler, which is covered in a good bit of detail in Chapter 1. After having the development environment properly configured, you will then be ready to follow along with the book and the example concepts presented therein. Derek recommends you familiarize yourself with the library code referenced Chapter 14. Here, Derek carefully details the majority of his macro libraries, even including the corresponding page numbers in the Mapping the C64 book. So on page 110, Derek lists the reasons why he used macros rather than subroutines. And he lists the reasons as, when including the library code, only the macros used take up memory, whereas one copy of each subroutine would be assembled even if not used. Subroutines have a speed disadvantage of the extra JSR and RTS instructions. With runtime loops, not kick assembler build time loops, it's more memory efficient to use a macro without the JSR and RTS, as macros are only placed into memory once in this instance. Macros can have parameters passed in. So those are the main reasons why his library, starting at page 110, are comprised of macros. Setting up the kick assembly environment can be tricky, so if you do find yourself needing a little more assistance with that, I have previously worked on a video outlining the process which can be of some assistance. In Chapter 2, Derek provides a quick explanation of the 6502 registers and explains what macros and subroutines are used for. He then describes the differences between labels, constants, and variables. With the included source code download, we are able to follow along chapter by chapter. We are encouraged to make tweaks to the code in order to make sure we are comprehending the content. Alright, now after you have downloaded the assets from the book and the forum website, and you put it in your folder wherever you like to store it, you'll see that the book is broken out into the different chapters. And you have the chapters and the programs and the library and the reference code. Oh, and you have some tools. The tools. In Chapter 1, I'll just show that he had to set up your workspace right here. And then he has this program right here. If you've properly configured VS Code, pressing F6 will initiate the program. And you see here all it did was turn the foreground and background yellow. So let's move that off the screen. So let's see what we have here. Set screen color yellow, sets the background and border colors. So if we wanted to debug this program using the C64 debugger, what you can do is right in VS Code, you can come in here and set your breakpoint. If you wanted to break on line 20, you can click on this to the left of the line number, or you can just type in .break somewhere in the code. And then you press Shift and F6 to initiate the debugger. So when C64 debugger first starts up, it might not be on the right format that you're looking for, the screen format. Like it might be you might be looking something like this. So what I like to do is go ahead and press Shift and Control and then F5. This is the screen version, the format of the screen that I like, because it has your Commodore 64 screen right here and up here, and it has you can easily take a look at your 0 page or all of your memory right over here, and then it has the labels, at least what you can read, the viewable part of the label. If it's not too long, looks like it's getting chopped off here on the left side. So it looks like it's stopping right there at where I had the break to load a 7, which is yellow, and then it's storing at D020, which is the foreground, and D021, which is the background. And what he said on page 18 was to go ahead and try loading different values into AX and Y and storing them in BG color 0 and EXT color. So we're going to try that. You see right here it says background color, which is being passed down. So what we can do, and then there's also the EXT color, which is set right here. We can either change the value that's being passed down, or we can change it right here. You know, we can just experiment. So right here, it looks like it's set to cyan. Let's run it and see what we get as a default before we change anything. Okay, so you see the background, the border here is green. The foreground background color is blue or cyan, and the foreground character is 2 with red. He filled the screen with the number 2 and red. So if we wanted to change something other than cyan, let's go with orange. Let's see how orange looks. Hope that's a label. Oh, there it is, orange with red, number 2s. Now let's change the value of the border color here. I'm thinking black. And F6. Oh, and that looks good. So we have an example with black. And so that's an example of how you can go ahead and play with those values. In Chapter 3, we're introduced to the concept of debugging and profiling. Profiling is a term used to describe how long a section of code takes to execute. This can be accomplished by changing the border color before and after program execution. This chapter is titled Debugging and Profiling, but it covers printing to the screen and profiling. 6. And you'll see that's why it's called print to screen. And you'll notice a couple of things. He has the byte variables displayed in the middle, and then below that the 0 page information displayed. And then below that you'll see the colors shifting down there, and that's what he's referring to as profiling. On page 21, he says, a simple way to profile how long a section of code takes to execute is to change the screen border color. We begin by waiting for a particular scan line each frame to synchronize the screen refresh rate to 50 Hz PAL or 60 Hz NTSC. This is so our game code runs at a stable frame rate. Without synchronization, the game loop would run as fast as possible, and its speed would change depending upon how much code was executed. And then on page 22, he brings it home by saying, all code needs to be run in a single frame update to avoid slowdown. So this is very important. You want to try to get all your code execution done in a single frame if you can. Chapter 4 covers the concept of the program interrupt, or IRQ, interrupt request, the default interrupt, the wedge interrupt, and multiple raster IRQs. This is where the concepts start to get a bit more complicated and may require additional studying. At the tail end of the chapter, he discusses sprite multiplexing. Sprite multiplexing is a way of programmatically allowing for more than the maximum number of hardware sprites to be displayed on the screen. In his program example, he simultaneously displays 56 animated sprites on the screen at the same time. Now in chapter 4, the title is Mind If I Interrupt? And so it's covering the program interrupts, and you'll see there's 3 programs, Game Main 1, Game Main 2, and Game Main 3. So let's run Game Main 1 and see what we get. Okay, here we're showing IRQ vector low and high. FFFE, FFFF. This is the default IRQ setting program example. And let's look at main 2 and run that one. in Game Main 2, it's similar to Game Main 1, except there's a few small changes. He talks about it on page 37. There's a few small changes required to the code to use faster IRQs. So that's what Game Main 2 is all about. Okay. Let's go back to Game Main 1. He wants us to put a break right here on page 34. He wants us to put a break right next to Game Main IRQ 1 and then do Shift F6 to start the debugger. And then he wants us to use the Control and F2 to look at that view. And while in this view, he wants us to mouse and scroll down the memory map to get to the bottom, FFF. So we can use the mouse to do that, or I think we can hit page down. Let me see. Yeah, we can hit page down to get all the way to the bottom of the memory map of the Commodore 64. The last two locations, FFFE and FFFF, should contain 48 and FF, and they do, which is the label for the start of the row. FFF0 is the label for the start of the row. He says, notice that the left-hand column shows the same memory locations as the center section, but translated into assembly instructions for easier viewing of code. So this over here, if we were at the bottom, we're not at the bottom. But what he's saying is this is the assembler view, and on the middle section is the kind of the data dump view. And that's what it would look like in assembly language, those last few lines. Now, in program Game Main 2, it's basically similar to Game Main 1, except he wanted to go with faster IRQs. So on page 39, what he wants us to do is, again, set a breakpoint right here at Game Main IRQ 1, and then hit Shift and F6 to run the program. And then the view that he wants us to look at this time is the source code view, Control Shift F3. And that's nice. So that's just looking at the source code and then the machine code on the far left. The breakpoint memory address for the Game Main IRQ1 IRQ routine is 0B1A, which is correct. So it's sitting there on that breakpoint. The source code shows the first instruction, which is inside lib raster IRQ start v macro. Click on the address and press up and down arrows to see the source code before and after. So you can kind of look at it up and arrow. I'm just doing up arrow, down arrow. That's nice. And then he goes on to discuss sprite multiplexing is the third program, I'm assuming. Let's look at it. Game Main 3, F6. And these are the little dudes that he uses in his Beach Bar game. But in this example, he is showing us that what you can do with the sprite multiplexing. And then some of the highlights here. Sprites have specific memory requirements on page 42. 43, sprite updates must be finished before they are drawn. And then on 44, he tells us to assemble and run the program. And here we don't really experiment around too much with it. But with having the sprite multiplexer in place, now allows us to move on to making the game, which is the next chapter, Chapter 5. Chapter 5 begins the second half of Volume 2. Here, Derek begins a fairly detailed dissection of his Beach Bar game, building upon all the concepts previously covered. So with Chapter 5, what he wants us to do in the book, we don't have a program section. He wants us to go to the programs, PRGs, and then run beachbar.prg. And let's run the Beach Bar program. That's cool. Turn that way down. He has the sound effects for the ocean playing for a few times, and then he has a song that's running. I'm going to turn the volume all the way down, though. And here he's just kind of telling us on page 46 how to play the game, what the buttons do, what the fire buttons do. And he wants you to familiarize yourself with playing the Beach Bar game and how you play it. And basically this is the completed game after you've done the whole book and you've familiarized yourself with all the concepts within the book. This is what you'll get at the end. But before we get to that point, we have to go there slowly through all the chapters. Starting in chapter 6, it discusses Billy the Barman. So we'll close that. We'll go over to chapter 6. Code, and we have a few programs in here. Now here he wants us to open up SpritePad. So Derek was kind enough in his download package to include all the tools that we need for getting started here, and SpritePad is located in the tools folder, SpritePad 2.0 beta. It's an older version, or older copy. I'm assuming it's the free version. And let's start that up and take a look at it. And then let's go ahead and load in the bar sprites. And that is in the chapters folder / content. And let's look at the bar sprites 1. And you'll see those are the little guys right there. And what you can do, what's neat about SpritePad, is you can highlight by holding Shift and then click. You can highlight these and then animate them. So I could go here, Shift, send it to the animator, and then hit play down here. And that's how you can animate. You can go in and actually change the sprites, the colors, and there's a lot you can do in SpritePad that's beyond the scope of this video, but I just wanted to show you that. We'll do one more. How about him walking up and send it to the animator. Anyway, that's a quick look at SpritePad. On page 54, he stresses that sprite colors are set in code, not exported from SpritePad. So you set the colors in the code. Okay, so let's take a look at GameMain1.asm. Let's see what that does by itself. Okay, let me see if my joystick. Alt. Okay, so right at this point, he doesn't move around. So this one is just displays one sprite. If we hit F6 on GameMain2, you can actually move little dude around and gives you your positions up on the top left. And I'm doing this with a joystick in port 2. Yeah, he's saying to go in and mess around with some of the player constants. You could go in here and mess around, maybe change some of the colors and that sort of thing, and then try that out. Moving on to chapter 7, Jamaica-mon. Here we're going into the character set modifications, and we're using the tool called CharPad. And he says down at the bottom of page 60 to try creating your own character sets and screens. Colors are saved per character set entry. So let's switch over to his tools that he included over in his book file / tools. Then switch over to CharPad. He has version 2.3, which I'm sure is an older version as well. And bring it up. File, open project. What we want to do is navigate over to the content folder. So that's under the chapters, then content. And he has the beach bar screens.ctm, which is for CharPad. And here we can play around with all the different characters. So you could go in here and edit these characters, make your own. You could create your own character sets, multicolor or standard. And I just wanted to show a little bit of CharPad. I'm not really an expert on this product. The more you get into game development, the more you'll need a tool similar to CharPad. And on page 61, he says a single character set is shared between all 4 game screens. Let's see if we can run GameMain. Oh wow, okay, there, so that's running. I can move the little dude. Okay, so he just kind of covers the program code in this chapter, and then he says, check it out on page 66. He does say to try walking around all 4 screens. And it doesn't let me go over there. Ah, there we go. See if I can go down or up. Oh, there we go. No collision at this point. Very cool. I think that's all 4 screens. Now, on chapter 8, it's called Things That Go Bump, and it has to do, at least on page 67, he's talking about collisions. Let's run that one. See if I can run into anything. Yeah, see, I'm running into the bar. Yeah, so I can't run into that. Okay. Which is good. And he says this is controlled in gameplayer.asm. And he's pointing out at the bottom of page 69 to try adjusting the collision points to see how it affects the player collisions. Is that the collision index? Let's change that to 50 instead of 100 and see if that affects anything. Oh, we have to switch back to game main. See if I can run into the bar. It doesn't look like that. Oh, see, now I'm running into the bar earlier. And I can't get to the bar stools. So it definitely made a difference there. He says on page 71, try adjusting the player call index to make different characters collidable. And that's what I just did. Chapter 9's entitled, I Need a Drink. Let's take a look at it. And he goes into some of his game flow programming. Like on page 76, he has a complete diagram. Try matching the walking state flowchart to the game bar state walking code. So on page 78 and 76, there's 2 little flow charts. So what he's saying here is to go ahead and run this one by hitting F6, and then you'll notice that customers now go to the bar and order drinks. If they receive the correct drink, they'll drink for a while before leaving. If they're left waiting for too long, they'll also leave. Note that the sprites are displayed incorrectly on other screens until those screens are implemented. So that's kind of neat how it just... And he says, try serving up some drinks. I'm losing customers. Chapter 10 is entitled Sun Worship. And then, so I think this is for one of the other screens. There are a maximum of 6 beachgoers at any time. Has another flowchart on page 85 and 87. Try matching the walking state flowchart to the game lounge update state walking code. So you can kind of see like, hey, is fire pressed? Yes. Do this. No, do this. And so you can kind of try to figure out how the program flow compares to the flow chart if you take time looking through it. And he has a few more examples of those on page 88 and 89. And then he just says to go ahead and run the program. Let's go to chapter 11. We're just kind of stepping through the code. We're not going to know everything about the program just by doing this, but it can help familiarize ourselves with what Derek has tried to set up here for us. It's called a bit nippy, and here we're talking more about the interrupt code and the interrupt library macros. He's talking about the crab motion. He's doing the sprite multiplexer for the crab. So let's see what that looks like, hitting F6 to run the program. Do you see any crabs? Because I don't. Maybe down here. Maybe off to the right. Oh, there's the crabs. There's the crabs. Okay. So they're moving left, they're moving backwards and forwards. He says on page 92 to try changing the crab's offset X max value. If it's greater than 255, it'll wrap around as bytes are being used for X arrays. Okay. So you don't want to go greater, you can't go greater than 255. So let's take a look at the program code. Let's go to the game crabs. And he says to play around with the crab's offset X value. Right here at 70, let's go 150. And then run the program again. Oh yeah, see here, they're going all the way through the screen on the left side. Let's put it back to what it was. Now they're not going all the way through the left side. Okay, so you increase the X max and it seems like it does the opposite of what I thought it was going to do. Offset subtracted, offset added. It shows on page 93 how the offset works. Okay. Then he talks about collisions on 94 and 95. Says, try getting to the towel or drink refill without turning red. Let's try that. Oh, just turned red. Oh, I see. That's what he's saying. Just play around with it. Okay. Chapter 12 is titled, Let Me Hear Ya. And here is where we're talking about the SIDs, the SID chips. And he talks about the high voltage SID collection on page 96 and 97. And he has implemented a SID player on page 98. SID file import address must match the load address. Try downloading and playing different SIDs. On page 99, switch to the game main2 file and run that. Let's take a look at that. F6. Okay, he says to try changing the music in this one. All right, one of the things that I went ahead and did was I threw in another SID file that's in the PAL format over in the chapters, Retro Game Dev C64 Volume 2 book files, chapters, content. And that way we could easily switch it out without having to change too much of the code. And where you do that is go over to gamedata.asm and then just change the file name right here. And save that. And run it and see how it sounds. So that's the Galencia loader. Anyway, a couple things to note about the SID files is Derek told me that most SID files are created at 50 Hertz PAL. Then if you play them on an NTSC system, 1 out of every 6 frames is skipped in the player code to slow it back down to 50 Hertz. And that is done in the libsoundinit_a library sound.asm. So in libsoundinit_a, he's saying you can adjust this value here, just load a 1 or a 0 to switch it between NTSC and PAL. And then on chapter 13 is essentially the final chapter of the book called That's a Wrap. Talks about what a HUD is and the game memory usage at the final few pages. And so there's quite a bit to dissect in this book. And then the final chapter is your libraries. And so what you really want to do to familiarize yourself with is the chapter 14 is all the library code, because that's where he'd put all of his macros. And he has a really good explanation for each of the libraries in there. And so that is the Retro Game Dev C64 Edition Volume 2 by Derek Morris. That is a sort of quick walkthrough, kind of an overview, glancing at most of what the chapters do. and then trying out a few things here and there. And you can glean a lot from the book and following the examples, and I do recommend you check it out.